I hope we didn't lose everyone there. It's done now, right? So good afternoon. I'm Catriona, Kat, and this is Romy. We're from the Sussex Centre for Consciousness Science at the University of Sussex. And we're going to be talking to you about a data set we've been looking at recently, supervised by Adam Barrett. So this data set has actually already been analysed and published by Jimo Borjigin, who we're collaborating with. But we thought it'd be, so they have reported basically a surge in gamma activity near death. And we were really interested in kind of investigating the behavior of some complexity measures on data like this. So this is how we've approached it. Where am I? Select here. So death has fascinated us throughout human history, and I'm sure no one in this room needs convincing that this is important and interesting, like, research topic. But before we explore the neuronal dynamics of the dying process, we should briefly understand how we clinically determine death. So there's two main ways of doing this. The first is the cardiopulmonary death. So this is where the heart and the lungs have irreversibly ceased to function. This often occurs where resuscitation is either not possible or it's failed. And following this, after the brain doesn't have oxygen supply anymore, brain death then kind of follows. Brain death can be determined separately, and it's declared when the brain and the brainstem have, again, irreversibly ceased to function. So this is presence of coma, absence of brainstem reflexes, and apnea. So use of EEG is actually not routine at all in determining brain death, but if it were to be used, this is where EEG activity would be less than 2 microvolts in amplitude. So this is basically where we are only observing signal noise in the EEG. Could you? Oh, sorry. I was just meant to say, so originally it's kind of assumed that looking at EEG signal, you'd assume hypoactivity, so reduced global brain activity on the EEG signal following cardiac arrest. You've gone to that one. Okay, so it might be possible, based on the findings that have been published, that some activity remains following cardiac arrest. Well, there's many challenges in studying the dying process. So otherwise healthy individuals don't tend to be undergoing EEG monitoring when they die. And people that are undergoing EEG monitoring are in hospital, and we can't plan for the time of death. So all of these things are really difficult to control. But despite this, there have been some interesting findings suggesting that the brain is capable of generating coordinated activity during this period. So the first ever continuous EEG recording of a dying human brain was only reported actually back in 2022. And this received a lot of media coverage, which we won't go into. But authors here, so again, they're showing this increase in gamma power near death after cardiac arrest, as well as phase amplitude coupling between these high frequency gamma bands and the lower frequencies such as alpha. So this is kind of interesting because this suggests there's a coordinated pattern of activity, not just this isolated surge in gamma. And similar findings have also been reported in animal studies, such as in rodents. And this oscillatory activity has been associated with various conscious states, from waking consciousness, rapid eye movement sleep, to altered states of consciousness like meditative states. So it seems quite tempting for people to overblow these kind of findings, speculating about the relation of this activity to phenomenology. But caution is really urged with any of this because this is an unavoidable kind of falling into the trap of reverse inference errors here. So even more recently, similar findings have been reported for the data set that we have been analysing. So this was EEG for 4 patients who were comatose at baseline. This is before and after the removal of their ventilatory support. So authors reported again there's a surge of gamma activity in 2 out of the 4 patients, not all of them. This is alongside this cross-frequency coupling. So again, this seemingly coordinated patterns of activity. And the authors are suggesting that there's a need to reevaluate the role of the brain after cardiac arrest during the dying process. So just a little bit more detail on the data set. As I said, all 4 of the patients were comatose at baseline. So there was no evidence of voluntary behavior or overt consciousness in the last 24 hours before the removal of their life support. And they passed away during EEG monitoring. These surges in gamma were reported specifically for the TPO, which is, again, like kind of generated a lot of interest, for consciousness science, the TPO junction. And again, this is for 2 of the 4 patients. And here we want to really highlight these 2 patients that they're reporting, the surge of gamma activity, the surge of cross-frequency coupling, were 2 patients that had a history of seizure activity. So we can't rule out that this activity was, in fact, seizure. So now, sorry, yes, we will circle back, but yes, we'll spot it.
So now, why were we especially interested in investigating complexity in this case? So consciousness and complexity has a long history of theoretical foundations, dating the 90s, and has shown predictive power in differentiating levels of consciousness, and specifically between, for example, deep sleep or anesthesia, in which Lempel-Ziv was quite slow. And on the other hand, more psychedelic induced states like LSD or psilocybin that has been shown to be increased during this stage compared to awake states. And there are many different measures of complexity. So, for example, topological differentiation that is used on the extraction of some topological networks, and on which then the data is complexity is estimated on these networks. Or on the other hand, there are many other measures, but such as temporal differentiation, which is basically looking at the variety or diversity of the brain over time. So here we mainly focus on temporal differentiation because we're interested about the signal through time, through the dying process. And so Lempel-Ziv has remarkable success in distinguishing global state of consciousness, as I just said. And this measure can be interpreted as a differentiation component that captures the signal diversity. And so what is Lempel-Ziv actually measuring? So I'm pretty sure most of you know the zip file. So the Lempel-Ziv algorithm of the zip, the algorithm of zip file is actually based on Lempel-Ziv. So it works by finding the shortest possible descriptions of a sequence by identifying repeating patterns for compressions. And so the shorter the description of the sequence, the lower the Lempel-Ziv value. And conversely, higher Lempel-Ziv complexity value reflects a lack of compressibility of the signal, and therefore kind of can be interpreted as a richer signal with more type of patterns through time. However, there is an important critique with Lempel-Ziv, which is that it tends to be maximal when there is also maximal randomness of the signal. So it makes it difficult to know whether when, for example, there is a high Lempel-Ziv, is it actually measuring signal randomness, or is it measuring interesting rich signal? And what Lempel-Ziv is telling us about consciousness. So we raised from these 3 main research questions. So first, what happens to Lempel-Ziv during the dying process? Does it increase alongside the surge of gamma band burst of activity, as we saw in these 2 patients? And if it does, can we interpret this as experiential states, such as, for example, ND? Because on one hand, we saw that Lempel-Ziv can increase during psychedelic states, and that could be interpreted as like a higher repertoire of states. So maybe if it increased during the dying process, during the surge of gamma, it could maybe indicate this. But on the other hand, as I said just earlier, it can also correlate with noise. So we can just be measuring a lot of noise. So this is what we found. So our result of Lempel-Ziv in patient 1, 2, 3, and 4. So blue is the baseline before removal of ventilatory supports. And we indeed see that Lempel-Ziv is increasing during gamma surge. So here we see gamma surge in blue. Lempel-Ziv is increasing indeed, but it keeps increasing through time as the brain is continue dying. And it's also remains super high in all the patients for which we didn't even capture any high gamma surge. So yeah, to summarize, we found that alongside the surge of gamma activity in these two patients, we see an increase of Lempel-Ziv complexity, but however, it remains high for all the 4 patients at flat line, so when the brain is actually dying. So it makes sense because Lempel-Ziv has been shown to correlate with maximal randomness. But also, as the cell begins to die, it's perhaps expected that we would have a reduction in coordinated activity between regions. So basically, the brain is shutting down, so less meaningful signal, so also much noise. Yeah, so overall, our findings highlight the non-limitation of Lempel-Ziv, but still, it cannot rule out that this high Lempel-Ziv is not indicating of experience.
So again, just given that this initial increase in Lempel-Ziv activity is occurring alongside the reported surge of gamma, and this surge of gamma is also reported alongside this coordinated pattern activity measured by the cross-frequency coupling, it's at least possible that such coordinated activity and signal diversity could support experience. It's at least possible. It's also, I think, just really pertinent to just remember that in the case of these patients, this would mean them awakening from their coma after the removal of their life support, experiencing something, and then continuing to die after again. Possible. But in any case, how would we know? We can't ask them. So possibly the only route to speculation about the phenomenology around the dying process is through reports of near-death experiences. So this is like a really fascinating area of study in itself, and it's gained like increasing kind of popularity, I think. So most commonly, these reports follow from resuscitation after cardiac arrest. And this occurs in the mixed findings, but from roughly 10% of people that are resuscitated from cardiac arrest have these kind of reports of NDEs. So there is a remarkable cross-cultural kind of similarity in phenomenological like reports of these experiences, which is really interesting and maybe hints that there might be a neurophysiological signature to these experiences, which then we could maybe relate to other experiences that people can't report. But again, reverse inference is a difficult thing. So yeah, these but NDEs do offer this kind of unique window into the kind of experience that might occur during the dying process. Sorry. I'm just going to remind you now that all 3 patients, so again, whoever managed to spot that, the first patient ever recorded had a history of seizures. The 2 patients here also reported this gamma surge, history of seizures. So it's very possible that the resultant hypoxic state of the brain following cardiac arrest, it means that the cells enter the state of hyperexcitability due to lots of glutamate release and all kinds of cellular stuff going on. This could then trigger seizure activity in those predisposed. Even if these are in fact like seizures, that doesn't negate the chance that there's also experience attached to these. So people that have seizure activities, they often report very similar kind of phenomenology to near-death experiences, such as out-of-body experiences.
So now, as you see, our results are quite really difficult to interpret. The data is quite noisy. It's hard to pre-process this data because the signal is already really, really minimal. So we don't want to extract any meaningful part of the signal. It's hard to interpret the phenomenology because patients died. So instead of leaving you with a take-home message, we wanted to leave you with some food for discussion. We would really love to have your feedback, even negative, after this, to see what we can do with this work. That is quite fascinating, but yeah, hard to interpret. So we thought about 3 axes of discussion. The first one is as we talked already, is there any experience during the dying process? So in our study, we found that Lempel-Ziv complexity was quite high through the dying process. However, with a high Lempel-Ziv complexity, can a highly complex brain support a minimal form of conscious experience during dying? I think that Chris were just asking this question also in psychedelics. So I think it's quite fascinating because it doesn't mean, I don't think it means that if Lempel-Ziv is high, you cannot have minimal type of experience, but it can be still really rich while being minimal. Also, it leads to rethink the boundaries of consciousness. So it's important to bear in mind that all the reports from MP are done in meditation studies. However, here we absolutely not dealing with healthy conditions because patients died. And it can lead us to consider other states such as Tugdam, in which expert meditators are dying during the meditations. Also NDEs, and also, although not dying, disorder of consciousness. So it's really pointing out towards a non-binary process, dying process, but that can go until what minimality can this dying process go? The second axe of this discussion, could there be different types of MP? So to recap, MP has been described as pure consciousness, and it's saying that self-consciousness, time representation, and self-location are not necessary conditions for consciousness to occur. And we ask whether that would be possible to have a sort of space of minimal possibilities in which there could be different types of minimal experiences, all minimal, but still a space of these minimal types of experience. And I think it can make sense to ask this question because as we see, the brain can have very different constraints according to the state it is in, and also the constraints leading to really high inter and intra-individual differences. And also we could maybe talk about a relative minimality in which a minimal aspect of the experience is minimal with respect to a specific state and context. So here we ask whether, for example, there is an MP during the dying process. Is it different than during meditation? And finally, we wanted to assess the methodological, practical, and ethical considerations. So first, as we said many times, Lempel-Ziv complexity is not a perfect measure because it reaches maximality as maximum randomness. Also, that would be amazing to be able to have a phenomenological interpretations of these measures, but we don't know how to do that. So if one of you have an idea, that would be great. It's also quite important to keep in mind the ethical considerations because we are really dealing with really, really sensitive states. So we don't want to be speculating on any phenomenology because there are also families involved around this process. So we don't want to tell anything that we are absolutely not sure of. And also, I think it's making a link with Yair talks this morning when Yair, you were talking about acceptance and openness, especially of death during MP. I think it's interesting because in all reports of near-death experience, in many reports of near-death experience, patients report this choice of returning to life or not. And I don't think there is any single report of the fact that they chose to go back to death. So here I'm just asking, let's say if you are dying and you are having an NDE and you are having an MPE during this state, then you might accept death and then you might not decide to return to life. So yeah, that's it. Just thoughts, nothing. Yeah, just thoughts. So thank you all for your attention, and thank you so much for the organizers, for Thomas, and yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.